In new developments displayed across the front page of every newspaper this morning in President Trump's settlement agreement with the IRS, Eamon Javers joins us now with more. Hey, Eamon.
Yeah, hey to you, Joe. In an unprecedented arrangement, the Trump administration has barred itself from pursuing any and all claims against President Trump and his family that could have been made by the IRS, including his tax returns, as part of a controversial $1.8 billion settlement between President Trump personally and the government that he leads. Now, the protection extends to Trump, his family members, the Trump Organization, and parties including trusts, parent, sister, or related companies, affiliates, and subsidiaries. It covers any pending tax audits of Trump and others the IRS may have been conducting, and the sweeping exemption of Trump and his family from normal obligations under tax law raises the question of whether Trump has directed his government to award him a settlement on favorable terms that no other American could get. It comes as part of the settlement of a $10 billion federal lawsuit against the IRS filed in Miami by Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, and their company over the leak of Trump-related tax filings by an IRS employee. Now, as part of that settlement, the Justice Department agreed to finance what is being called an anti-weaponization fund. With $1.8 billion in taxpayer money, the fund would compensate alleged victims of law enforcement actions under the Biden administration. Now, a Department of Justice spokeswoman defended the deal, saying there would be little point in settling several significant claims if either party could simply turn around and seek to initiate more adverse claims that could have been pursued previously. Back over to you guys.
So, Eamon, the tax code prohibits the president and also the heads of all the executive agencies from either directing audits or ending audits. And these are all audits, I think.
Right.
Some of these audits go back, I think, as of 2022, there are still audits open from 2015 to 2019. And it's unclear whether any of those have been settled. The only exception to that, to prohibiting that, is for the Attorney General. Pam Bondi left.
Yep.
The president, for acting AG, has his personal lawyer, Blanche, in there. So,
right.
Now, I am not defending it. I understand why Trump doesn't like the IRS. I certainly do. And even before he ran for president, he used to complain all the time about being audited. And I think it got worse with the lawfare that he would say he was subjected to in the prior administration. So he was ready. I think he does things sometimes because he can, honestly, because he can, and torpedoes be damned. My question to you is, I mean, Democrats are up in arms. They're going to try and get the courts to stop this. The Journal says it's unclear who would have standing. What do they mean by that? Why would it, or it might have to be Congress that would try to prevent this from, being maintained the way it is.
Sure. I mean, standing is a legal term, meaning, who has the right to sue, right? So the question is, who's harmed by this, and then could therefore bring a case in court. And so I'd leave that to the lawyers to argue whether any average taxpayer could say, I'm harmed by it because I have to follow the law and the president doesn't.
Okay.
But, we'll see how that's all adjudicated in the courts. But I think you're right. The president is doing this because he can.
Yeah, Congress could step in, but the Journal points out you'd need Republican votes, but not after the midterms, theoretically. So this,
right.
I mean, this could all be challenged in a couple of months.
Yeah, I think a Democratic Congress would certainly challenge this.
Right.
And obviously, if there's a Democratic president in 2029, they could reverse this. But for the meantime, it does give the president some exemption from any kind of investigation or prosecution by the IRS. And it's just a sweeping thing.
And going back.
You do wonder if... Going backwards, right.
Yeah.
And, you do wonder, what the reaction would be if any other president had done this. I mean, I think this is the kind of thing where you see Trump doing things that other presidents had really didn't contemplate.
I would like, and here we're going to get to whataboutism. I would like that Hunter Biden deal.
Sure.
Past crimes, future crimes, former crimes, anything here, there, Biden Inc.
You mean the pardon?
Yeah, totally. Blanket.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm not, as I say, not defending it. It's not my place to defend this, and I understand the ire. And I'm sure Andrew wants to get in here.
Well, Eamon, my question actually relates to where you were going, which is if you get a Democratic president or Democratic control of the House and the Senate or something in 28, or maybe it happens in 32, or who knows when, what kind of look back is even possible? And assuming, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but assuming that the president could ultimately, before he leaves office, pardon himself and everybody around him on the way out, does all this matter anyway? And is that going to become the new norm for presidents in this country?
Well, I think the most important question is the question of the norms, right? I mean, what kind of presidency do we want in this country? Do we want a president who's unaccountable to the law, who the assumption is will pardon himself and everybody around him, so that nobody has to follow the law during the administration? And that's a question for future Americans as to what kind of country you want to live in. But for right now, I mean, I think tax law is very complicated. I would hesitate to offer any kind of opinion there. But I think Congress could wipe this away in the future and allow the IRS to go back and continue to look at some of those audits of the president. Just take a hypothetical. If the president did commit a tax crime in the past, this would then prevent the IRS now from investigating that. But if Congress undoes that in the future, I would think that they could go back and redo it. Now, tax lawyers might jump all over me and say, well, no, because if it's wiped out once, you can't go back. There are no do-overs. I don't know. But I think this, at least for now, gives the president enormous relief from any kind of pending audit or tax penalty that he might have been facing. And it's a benefit to the president given by the president, right? And so the question for Americans is that what you want?
And is that true, though, of the pardon piece, too? Meaning, if he were to pardon himself at the end of his term, would that apply, that you think the IRS could still go back? I would think that they couldn't go back.
If he pardons himself, right, I was just talking about the actual document that we have in front of us today. If he pardons himself, then they can't go back. That's lasting.
And then the secondary issue I wanted to ask you real quick about was the other piece of this is obviously this $1.6 or $1.8 billion that's going to go out potentially to people who feel that there's been, government warfare against them of some sort, lawfare against them. Is that something that you think will get undone in some other way later, too?
Well, it expires at the end of the president's term, right? So this is a temporary thing that's going to create this fund of money that is going to be the mechanics of it, how it's going to get dispersed, who it's going to get dispersed to, how those decisions are going to be made is all pretty opaque right now. The vice president talked about this in the briefing room yesterday and said these decisions will be made simply on a case-by-case basis. But he declined to rule out the idea that you could have the taxpayers sending money to people who assaulted police officers on January 6th. He said all that's going to have to be decided on a case-by-case basis. Not clear at all how that's going to be handled, who's going to handle it, and whether or not that information will ever become public. We don't know that the Department of Justice will ever disclose who got this money. So you have what's moving fast and low here, a lot of money moving fast and low, and it's not clear where it's going. That's, in my experience in Washington, that's always a danger for some kind of a political abuse.
And Damon, you go back to the original sin, and that is the leaking of Trump's tax returns by someone at the IRS, which allowed the $10 billion. But I don't know whether the $10 billion lawsuit had a really good chance of succeeding. There are some that argue that it wasn't going to succeed. So the president maybe was able the president was able to say, since it's the government, could have maybe some influence on whether it was settled, and then and that's where the $1.8 billion comes from. So it all.
Yeah, I mean, if the president's directing the settlement of his own case against himself, it seems like the outcome is pretty sure.
Right, and that's where the 1.8 comes from. All right, and as I say, some things are done because he can't, and he is he's got a lot that he thinks that he needs to account for that he thinks happened to him. So I'm not defending it, but I can understand it.